So now it's my pleasure to turn the stage over to Rick Saunders, our CEO, and the true visionary and driving force behind the creation of our purpose, our values, our brand, and our culture. Thank you.
Thank you, Pam. Thank you for doing that. I'm glad Pam decided to talk about culture today, because guess what? That's what I'm going to talk about too. Before I get started, I want to clear a couple things up. One, apparently 2 years ago, as I was speaking to you, I referenced my family, and as I typically do. And during that presentation, I mentioned to you that I had 3 children, and since that day, nearly every week, my son Chris, are you here? I don't even know that I've seen you in the room. Stand up. Shine a light on him. All the way in the back. Oh yeah, of course. Has reminded me that I have 4 children, not 3. And I don't know how I could ever forget that, but I'm publicly acknowledging today, son, and I hope you'll forgive me for doing that. 2 is, I did not put makeup on today. Mary Neal grabbed me and pulled me into that photo booth and kissed on me while I was in there. So I've got lipstick and makeup on, so it's her fault that I look the way I look. And 3rd, I tried real hard to convince Pam Rose to let me speak first. Now that just goes to show you how much influence I have in this company. But for the last 11 years, we've had to give up the next item on the agenda because I tend to speak too long. Do y'all know what the next item on the agenda is? Lunch, I know. Go figure, right? So as great a job as Pam did, as important as her message was, I felt like maybe you guys would have rather forfeited her speech instead of lunch. So I'll do the best I can, and we'll get through this as fast as we can. So thank you all for coming today. I know giving up part of your weekend is a big sacrifice for you, and I can't thank you enough. And we look forward to this meeting every year because I believe it's important that we spend time together out of the office simply just to get to know each other better, to share in the successes that we've enjoyed over the last year, and to celebrate the people within the organization who have really shown excellence during the past year, and to stay focused on what we need to stay focused on to do well in the coming year. Our culture team has worked for months to put this together so that they would create an environment of excellence for you and so that you would enjoy yourselves. Pam, you and your team have done an incredible job. Let's give them a big hand. I can assure you this wasn't put together just this weekend. And for our guests, thank you for coming and thank you for participating. I hope that not only do you enjoy yourselves, that you will find out a little bit more about First Reliance and what makes us truly a unique place. Over the last couple of years, I've tried to communicate to you that our industry has become accustomed to playing from the same strategic playbook, and that we needed to get really, really good at doing something different and unique for our customers. You see, the big banks are getting back in the game now, and they're going to come back in strong, and they're going to come back in with price. And while I think there's a place for price in banking, I'm also convinced that our customers now understand the fickle nature of our larger competitors, and that while price will matter, I don't think it's going to be the tiebreaker anymore. You see, I think our customers are looking for a bank that genuinely cares about them and that can ultimately help them achieve their financial goals in life. And I think we're doing a really incredible job at accomplishing that, but my fear is that if we don't continue to work well as a team, if we don't continue to have a strong culture, we won't continue to be able to deliver on that and make that difference at the end of the day. You see, in banking, things are moving very fast, and I'm afraid that they're moving so fast that we run a risk of losing our way. As if a massive credit crisis wasn't enough, one that only comes around once in 85 years, there's a 2,300-page financial reform document still sitting in Washington that has to be morphed into new law and new regulation that somehow we've got to adapt to and somehow we have to execute. So all the heavy lifting we've been doing to date is going to get heavier, I'm afraid, before we get through this thing. Several months ago, I met with a banker in Dallas, Texas. And this gentleman was a CEO of a mid-sized bank in Dallas during the savings and loans crisis, the late 80s and early 90s. And most of you here probably weren't in banking during the 80s and 90s, but I was. And probably was the worst crisis that banks have gone through since the Depression, excluding this one. So I was a bit curious to know what he felt like his challenges were, and I had this gentleman sitting here, and he was willing to talk to me, and my wife says I tend to ask too many questions anyway, so I'm firing off questions as fast as I can, trying to milk every piece of information I could out of this guy. And he said, Rick, let me make this simple for you. He said, people think that in going through a financial crisis like this, people that are running banks, that is, that you need to think about capital and liquidity and regulators, and all those things are important. He said, but the one thing that people most often forget about, that leaders of companies most often forget about, is the culture of an organization, the health of the team. He said, you see, after fighting and fighting and fighting and dealing with regulators and dealing with capital issues and trying to keep yourself profitable and cutting expenses and making the changes that you have to adapt to the new way of banking, people tend to get tired. He said that fatigue ultimately can fracture a culture in an organization. He said, so I would encourage you to go home and check on the health of your team. He said, all of you guys that are running your banks today understand the importance of capital and liquidity. It is what it is. He said, but if you're going to survive, and by the way, most of the survivors have already been decided in this thing, and the people that aren't going to make it because of the financial crisis have already been decided. What the new test is going to be is that who's going to do the best in the new world of banking. And we're going to survive this thing. There's no doubt about that. Our capital and liquidity is strong. We've returned back to profitability, which is very important, by the way. Give yourself a hand for that. But we've still got a lot of heavy lifting to do. If you ever watch Dr. Phil on TV, you know he's famous for saying to people that are having trouble, well, how's that working for you? Well, I had to ask myself that same question. And I want to be the first to apologize to you. You see, for the last couple of years, I've been hunkered down in my foxhole, trying to deflect the massive mortar shells that have been fired at us, trying to make sure we do have enough capital and liquidity, that I have not paid attention to the things that matter the most about our organization. And that's the values and the culture. I haven't forgotten about them, but we haven't been focused on them. So we're going to work on that, and we're going to talk about that, because I believe at the end of the day that company that's going to do well in the new era of banking is the one that has the strongest culture. Have you ever heard of the term a defining moment? You ever heard that term before? Well, let's watch one right now.
How about it, boys? Look like hockey to you? You want to settle old scores, you're on the wrong team. We move forward starting right now. We start becoming a team right now. So, why don't we start with some introductions? You know, get to know each other a little bit. Where you from? Who you are? You know, go ahead.
Rob McClanahan, St. Paul, Minnesota.
Who you play for?
For you, here at the U.
Jack?
Jack O'Callahan, Charlestown, Mass. Boston University.
Over here.
I'm Ralph Cox. I'm from wherever's not going to get me hit.
You guys don't want to work during the game? No problem. We'll work now. Goal line. That one. Think you can win on talent alone? Gentlemen, you don't have enough talent to win on talent alone. Again. You can come in here and play the Norwegian national team and tie them, and then go to the Olympics and win. You got another thing coming. You better think about something else, each and every one of you. When you pull on that jersey, you represent yourself and your teammates. And a name on the front is a hell of a lot more important than the one on the back. Get that through your head. Again. Win, lose, or tie, you're going to play like champions. Again. Again. Again.
Michael Ruzioni! We're through Massachusetts!
Who do you play for?
I play for the United States of America!
That's all, gentlemen.
You know, most of us have seen this movie, or certainly we've heard about the 1980 U.S. Olympic team that won the gold medal. Coach Herb Brooks decided as he was going to put this team together that he didn't want a team of individual contributors. That talent alone was not going to be the deciding factor in how he put his team together. You see, he wanted to find a group of average collegiate ice hockey players that understood the importance of values, and that their values were aligned with his values. He also wanted to make sure that his criteria included finding young men that were passionate about the game of hockey. But more importantly, he wanted to make sure that the people he chose for his team understood the value of team success and not individual success. That same criteria works and applies in the workplace as well. And it's the same criteria we use when we chose every one of you to be on our team. Several months ago, I asked our culture team to reach out to you after I had this meeting with the gentleman in Dallas to find out just how you were feeling about our organization. And overwhelmingly, you communicated back that you thought that this was still a great place to work, and that you still believed that our purpose was important, and that what we were doing for our customers and community was important. But you didn't let us off the hook either. You told us that you did not think we were playing as well as we should be as a team. You told me that you felt like we had different agendas within the organization and that we were not aligned. You also told me you didn't think we were communicating well enough. Well, I hear you loud and clear, and you have my word that 2011, I will have an action plan to work on these things for you. But it just doesn't stop with me. It has to be about you too. So let's talk about the foundation of our organization. You know, for most of my professional life, I have to admit I kind of operated without a personal playbook. I thought that just simply showing up at the office and doing my best would be enough to generate some type of success for my life. And I was very uncertain about what success meant. I was not well-defined. It was not a well-defined issue for me. But I was fortunate enough that early on in my career, I worked for a small company that believed in and thought what was important was very much aligned with what I believed in and thought what was important. You see, that was really an important part of my life because I could have made some really wrong turns at that point. And it wasn't until they sold their company and I was all of a sudden working for a much larger organization that I understood how important it was that I get real clarity around what success looked like and what happiness meant for me. And therein lies a pretty defining moment for me, because it was at that point that my brother Paul and my good friend Dale Porter was insisting that we start this bank. And I couldn't grasp my mind around why it was important because I didn't really understand clearly what was important to me and how I define success. But ultimately I did, and ultimately we came to the conclusion that this would be a good thing and that we should do this. So in my short experience with a large organization, and as we begin to get the company off the ground, I really kind of felt like it was important that we build an environment that would create unity and trust if we were going to have a strong and different and unique culture. And it didn't take me long to figure out, too, that I had no clue on how to do that. So I called on my friend Tommy Dowling, and for those of you that know Tommy Dowling, you know that he doesn't really take on an assignment without conditions. And he said, Rick, I'm going to help you with this, but there's a couple things that you have to agree to. And one of those things is that you have to agree that there's nothing more important than defining what's important. That would be our purpose and our values, why our company exists, and how we treat each other and our customers as we continue to grow our company. The other thing he said that you have to agree to is that you have to understand that for you to build a winning organization, that you have to build it through the efforts of a collective team and not through the contributions of individuals, which is about our culture and teamwork. So he sent me away. He sent me away to draft our values and our purpose, and I spent the next year of my life doing that. And I'm not talking about a retreat for a weekend. I'm talking about a year plus of rewriting and writing and rewriting and writing until I finally got it down on paper, until I finally had captured what was ultimately important to me. Now, the values of First Reliance Bank aren't the only good values in the world, but they are the things that are non-negotiables in my life, and they are the things that are non-negotiables for this organization as well. And I think we'd also agree that having a purpose and a clear set of values just kind of give us a compass for clear thinking. Excuse me. I think we would also, too, agree that not being passionate about that purpose and not living those values, if we don't do those things, that it's going to be hard for us to take our company to the next level. So how do you get passionate about something? How do you stay committed to something? Well, I've got a couple of points here that I want you to listen closely to, because I think at the end of the day that all these points are relevant in my life. And if they're relevant in mine, I'm sure they've got to be relevant in yours too. So pay close attention to them, because as you leave here today, I want you to not only be happy with your choice to be on our team, but I want you to have a playbook on how you can just be happy with life, period. And I know you get tired of hearing me say this, but I think the single most important principle we can do, apply to our lives, and the single most important thing that we can do with our life is trying to define what our purpose is. Now, I'm 50 years old, and for most of my life, I did not clearly have a definition centered around what my purpose was. And it wasn't until actually I started this company that I sat down and really drafted that out. And I can tell you that from personal experience, having a real sense of importance as to why my life exists has really changed my own views about life and my own views about people. I not only think it's our obligation in life to find it, but I think it's probably one of the greatest joys that we'll have as well, as try to identify and honor our purpose in life. You know, most of us have either been on a cruise, have known people that have been on a cruise, but there are cruises that are advertised as the cruise to nowhere. Has anybody ever heard of one of those? I recently saw an ad and it just kind of struck me, and just thought this was a really good point to bring up today, because a cruise to nowhere, people get on a boat and they don't go to some tropical island. They just get on a big boat and they go out and see, and they drive around in circles. All the while, they're sitting by a pool, they're having great meals, they're listening to great shows, It's like checking into a fine hotel or being in a resort. But what struck me when I saw this advertisement, I thought, wow, that's very much like a lot of people I know in life. It's that they wake up every day without a real clear destination on where they want to be. And a cruise to nowhere is kind of nice for a few days on a vacation, but there really is no way to spend our life, is it? So I think once we're clear about why we're here and what we want to do in life, I think we have to be clear about what we want. You know, we start out as a baby understanding clearly in life what we want, right? If you don't want it, if you want it, you just scream loud enough till somebody gives it to you. If you taste food that you like, you devour it. If you don't, you spit it out, unless you're like my daughter Riley that eats everything, including things that aren't food sometimes. But somehow along the way, we've been conditioned to think that we just can't have everything we want in life simply because we want it. And I'm not talking about entitlement. I'm talking about real clarity around what you want and being willing to pay the price to get it. Now, I'm going to share with you a brief story about the early part of my career, and I was real hesitant to do this because I don't want you to take this message the wrong way. And I'm not going to talk to you about necessarily the things I accomplished, but I want you to pay close attention to the journey that I went through and the decisions that I made. And I know that everybody's life is different and people approach things in different ways, but it could not find a better way to describe to you what I'm talking about when I'm talking about deciding what you want and being willing to pay that price for you. Early on in my career, I had applied for a job with a couple of banks, and the bank that I really wanted to work for was PD State Bank back here in home. Mr. Scarborough, the president of the company at the time, came to me and said, Rick, you know, I have 6 candidates, and I really don't understand what it is that you think so different about you and why you need to be the guy I select. Of course, I was prepared for that question, and I went through a series of things on my resume that I thought would make a difference, but what I told him was, look, I'll make this deal for you. If you will hire me, I'll work for free for you for 6 months. And if you don't like the work I produce, all you've lost is your time. And if I do, then pay me. Well, I knew clearly what I wanted, and I was willing to pay a price. And he did hire me, and thank goodness he paid me, because I'm not sure how I would have lived for 6 months. But he hired me with conditions, and he said, Rick, you know, I was 20 years old, by the way, when this was going on. He said, you seem awfully ambitious. And I want to hire a collector, and that was a step back from my current skill set. I was doing things and running an office for a finance company out of Charleston. He said, I need a collector today, I need a collector next year, I need a collector for the next decade, and I can see you're ambitious, and I don't want your ambition to get in the way of you being happy here. And I said, that's fine, I understand, I'm willing to take the job. Well, after a year or so working for this company, I'd really done well and didn't really have much to do anymore because we had the collections where we needed them. And I went to him and said, do you mind if I start making some loans? He said, I figured that was going to happen. And I guess you're right, though. You don't have enough to do. So let's give you something else to do. And making loans seems logical since you do have the capability of doing that without a lot of supervision. So within a couple of years, I built the largest portfolio in the company. And by the way, he said I could do that, but I didn't get a pay raise, and I still had to do my other duties too. So I took on the extra duties and built one of the largest portfolios in the bank, and guess what I did? I didn't ask for a pay raise. I went and asked for more. I saw they were going to sell a card business. So I went to them and said, do you mind if I run this card business for a while, see if I could get it turned around? Sure enough, they let me run it, but by the way, with no pay, with no promotion, with nothing other than, yes, you can take on more work. But I really wanted to get on their management team, and I knew to do that I needed to take on more responsibility. At the end of the day, the Scarboroughs did acknowledge the fact that I was working hard and that I was still growing my skill set and that I didn't demonstrate a sense of entitlement. Let me say that I was challenged. My attitude was challenged during that part. It was tough. I was a young man and I wanted to do well, and I didn't seem to be getting the recognition that I wanted, but they did ultimately promote me. And I did ultimately get a seat at the management table. And by 30 years old, I was sitting on their board of directors. All of those things, significant changes in my life, and all of those things because I didn't outwardly demonstrate a sense of entitlement, but that I was willing to pay the price and do what I had to do to grow my skill set. Now, you can say that your manager is getting in your way. You can say that the company's holding you back. You can say that we're too small to create an opportunity for you to grow professionally. And by the way, that company was a third of the size of our company. But when you start playing the blame game, you really miss out on opportunities in life. So I challenge you to understand clearly what your purpose is and decide what you want out of life and be willing to pay the price to do that. About 8 years ago, I felt inspired for some reason to write down on a piece of paper principles that I thought my children would need as they grew older that would help them. And in my house, this is what we call the 21 principles of life. And every week we try to go through those principles so that somehow or another they can capture them and use them as they get older. One of those principles deals with fear. You see, I think fear is a real concern in our life. I believe that fear is probably the number one reason for mediocrity and failure in life. Fear and low confidence really holds your talents back, and it really limits opportunities for you. You know, several weeks ago, my son Reed and his little buddy Michael next door came running out of the woods beside our house, and most of you have been to our house, and there's a small block of woods there. And they were out of breath and breathing real heavy, and I asked them what was wrong, and they said that they heard a cougar in the woods. Well, I've been in those woods before, and I've seen a deer and I've seen a few squirrels, but I can absolutely say I've never seen a cougar. And I don't know that I've actually ever heard of a cougar being spotted in the city limits of Florence, so I'm pretty sure these guys probably didn't see a cougar. My point in that, though, is that the real belief that a cougar existed created a physical reaction in these children. And this is what I call false evidence appearing real. And I'm afraid today that this recession is our cougar. That somehow or another, that if we don't overcome the fear that's going along with this recession, that it will stifle our innovation, our creativity, and our willingness and ability to work together as a team. There was a story told about a young boy that was at a baseball park playing ball by himself, and he was overheard saying, "I'm the greatest hitter in the world." This person watched this child throw the ball up in the air, swung as hard as he could, and said, "I'm the greatest hitter in the world, strike one." Unfazed by that, the little boy picked the ball up again. He threw it high up in the air and said, "I'm the greatest hitter in the world," and missed it again, said, "Strike two." He was a little bit puzzled at this point, so he looked at the bat and looked at the ball. Still didn't seem real fazed by it, so he threw the ball up in there again, and as he threw it up, he said, "I'm the greatest hitter in the world," and swung as hard as he could and missed it, strike three. He said, "Wow, what a pitch. I must be the greatest pitcher in the world." You know, facts don't cease to exist because they are ignored, do they? Our lives only improve when we take chances. And I think one of the greatest risks that we can take in life is to be honest with ourselves. Are you honest with yourself about how you feel about your family? Are you honest with yourself about your relationships? Are you honest with yourself about your health, about your weight? Are you honest with yourself about how you feel about this company? You know, more times than not, when I talk to people about relationships, I always tell them to focus inwardly. Focus on what you can change. Come to reality about what it is you bring to the table, and life tends to work out in your favor when you do that. Now, I know some of you don't want to hear this, but right at this very moment, your body's changing. Some of it for the good, and some maybe not so good. But the reality is your body is changing. Right this very minute, the weather is changing. Our world is changing. The economy is changing. And our industry is changing. You know, I think there are two types of changes that occur in life. One is a cyclical change, and the other is a structural change. And a cyclical change is much like the stock market. It goes up and it goes down. There are bull markets, there are corrections. People tend to travel more in the summertime. People tend to spend more around the holidays. These are changes that we just accept as normal part of life and the ebbs and flows of them, but then there are structural changes. And a structural change is something that's much like the invention of the airplane or the invention of the computer. And it's the kind of change that when it takes place, your life never goes back to the way it did before. And it's also the kind of change that if you resist it, you'll be swept away. And our industry is going through a structural change right now. Gone are the days of doing business as usual. We'll never go back to making the type of loans we did. We'll never go back to funding our balance sheets the way we did. We'll never be able to go back to spending the same amount of money to run our company again, and our customers are expecting us to deliver better and faster for them every day. Now, I don't expect you to immediately be comfortable with change. Who is? I know I'm certainly not, but the fact is that the world around us is changing. But I want you to think a minute about a time in your life where you decided to make a big change, like have a child, buy a house, change a job, walk into a room full of people you've never met before. Once you ultimately quit resisting to that change, what ultimately happened to your life? I would say more times than not, your life became better because of the change. So what I'm asking you today is to understand change is important. I want you to also understand that I know that change is difficult and challenging. But before you begin to resist change, I ask that you slow down. Let yourself ease into the change